Welcome to Sound Asleep Stories, where we weave tales of adventure and fantasy to lull you into a peaceful slumber. Tonight's story takes us to the chilling world of Skyrim, a land of towering mountains, ancient Nordic ruins, and powerful magic. We'll follow Anya, a skilled Nord hunter, as she embarks on a perilous quest to find a powerful artifact and keep it out of the hands of the evil that awakens it. Prepare to be transported to a realm of brave adventurers, biting wind and dangerous caves. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let the soothing sounds of our story carry you away to the land of dreams. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us what you thought of the story. Sweet dreams.
The Serpent's Fang.
Chapter 1. The Hunt. The Reach, a region in the westernmost part of Skyrim, known for its unforgiving peaks and treacherous slopes, held a stark, almost cruel beauty. Jagged snow-capped mountains pierced the sky, their shadows stretching long and dark across the frozen tundra. A biting wind howled through the valleys, carrying with it the scent of pine and the ever-present threat of a blizzard. It was in this wild and desolate landscape that Anya, a young Nord hunter, made her living. She was a daughter of the North, her blood infused with the resilience and strength of her ancestors. Her thick furs, worn against the relentless cold, did little to disguise the lean, powerful frame beneath. Her face, framed by a tangle of blonde braids, held the sharp angles and piercing blue eyes characteristic of her people. But there was a softness to her features too, a hint of youthful optimism that defied the harsh realities of life in the Reach. She moved with the fluid grace of a wolf, her steps silent on the snow-covered ground. Her bow, crafted from the heartwood of an ancient pine, was an extension of her own body, a tool she wielded with unmatched precision. Her keen eyes scanned the rocky terrain, searching for any sign of movement, any flicker of life that might betray the presence of prey. For Anya, the hunt was more than just a means of survival. It was a spiritual connection to the land, a way of honoring the ancient traditions of her people. The crisp air stung her lungs as she inhaled deeply, savoring the invigorating scent of the wilderness. Her breath formed a cloud of frost that dissipated quickly in the biting wind. Her gaze, sharp as a hawk's, settled on a set of tracks in the snow, delicate and precise. Deer. It was a young buck, judging by the size and spacing of the prints. A smile touched her lips, both from the thrill of the chase and the anticipation of a successful hunt. Meat was scarce in the winter months, and a kill like this would feed her family for weeks. With renewed purpose, Anya followed the tracks deeper into the mountains. The wind whipped around her, tugging at her furs and swirling the snow into a blinding flurry. But she pressed on, her focus unwavering, her senses attuned to every subtle change in the environment. The tracks led her higher and higher, up a winding path through a dense stand of snow-laden pines. The trees groaned and creaked under the weight of the snow, their branches intertwined like gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. The light began to fade as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. The temperature plummeted, the cold seeping into her bones despite her thick furs. Anya knew she was pushing her luck. Darkness was a hunter's enemy, and the mountains held dangers far more formidable than any deer. But she couldn't turn back now. The thrill of the hunt had taken hold, and the thought of returning home, empty-handed, was unbearable. She rounded a bend in the path, and there, in a small clearing, stood the buck. He was magnificent, his antlers crowned with snow, his dark eyes watching her cautiously. He snorted, pawing the ground with his hooves, his breath forming plumes of steam in the freezing air. Anya froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly she raised her bow, her movements smooth and practiced. She nocked an arrow, her fingers brushing against the fletching, her eyes never leaving the buck. He sensed the danger and tensed, his muscles rippling beneath his sleek coat. Anya held her breath, her finger tightening on the bowstring. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The wind died down, the snow settled, and the only sound was the beating of her heart. She released the arrow, the bowstring singing a low, deadly hum as it cut through the air. The arrow flew true, finding its mark with deadly accuracy. The buck stumbled, a look of surprise and pain flashing in his eyes, before collapsing to the snow with a heavy thud. Anya lowered her bow, her breath escaping in a long, slow exhale. Relief washed over her, mixed with a pang of sadness. Taking a life was never easy, even when it was necessary. She approached the fallen deer, her steps reverent, her head bowed, in a silent prayer of thanks to the gods for providing for her and her family. As she reached down to touch the buck's antlers, a deep, guttural roar shattered the silence. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and a shadow fell over her. Anya whirled around, her hand instinctively reaching for her hunting knife, her eyes wide with terror. Looming over her, its hulking form blocking the fading light, was a frost troll. It was a creature out of nightmare, its skin a sickly blue-grey, its flesh covered in a layer of ice and frost. Its eyes glowing red embers in the gathering darkness, fixed on her with predatory hunger. Its jagged teeth, dripping with saliva, were bared in a snarl that promised pain and death. Anya was frozen in place, her mind reeling, her body paralyzed by fear. The troll lunged, its massive claws slashing through the air, missing her by a hair's breadth. She scrambled back, barely managing to avoid the attack, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The troll roared again, the sound echoing off the mountains, a chilling prelude to the violence to come. It raised its club, a crude weapon made from a tree trunk, and swung it down with bone-crushing force. Anya threw herself to the side, rolling frantically across the snow as the club slammed into the ground where she had been standing a moment before. She sprang to her feet, her hunting knife clutched tightly in her hand, her mind finally catching up with the danger. She knew she couldn't outrun the troll. It was too fast, too strong. Her only chance was to fight, to use her agility and her knowledge of the terrain to her advantage. She darted around the troll, keeping just out of reach of its deadly claws, her eyes searching for an opening, a weakness she could exploit. The troll lumbered after her, its movements clumsy but surprisingly swift, its roars filling the air with menace. Anya dodged another attack, the wind from the troll's passing club ruffling her hair. She knew she couldn't keep this up for long. She was tiring, her muscles screaming in protest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She needed help, and fast. As if in answer to her silent prayer, a familiar voice boomed through the forest.
Anya, hold fast.
Torsten, a seasoned Nord warrior and Anya's mentor, burst into the clearing, his axe gleaming in the fading light. He was a bear of a man, his broad shoulders covered in thick furs, his face etched with the lines of countless battles. His war paint, a swirling pattern of black and blue, marked him as a warrior of the Companions, the ancient and honorable order of Nord heroes. He charged at the troll, his axe held high, his war cry a challenge that reverberated through the mountains. The troll turned, its attention diverted from Anya to this new threat. Torsten met its charge head-on, his axe crashing against the troll's club in a shower of sparks. Anya, her heart soaring with newfound hope, took her chance. She circled around the battling pair, her bow drawn, her arrows aimed at the troll's vulnerable spots. She let loose a volley of arrows, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. The troll roared in pain, its movements becoming more sluggish as the arrows pierced its thick hide. Torsten pressed his attack, his axe a blur of motion as he hacked and slashed at the troll's legs. The creature stumbled, its roars turning into gurgling cries of agony as its strength began to fail. Anya, seeing her chance, aimed one final arrow at the troll's chest. She drew back the bowstring, her muscles straining with the effort. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. She released the arrow, and it flew straight and true, piercing the troll's heart. The creature let out one last, strangled roar before collapsing to the ground with a deafening thud. The snow around it was stained crimson with its blood. Anya and Torsten stood over the fallen troll, their chests heaving, their bodies trembling with exertion. The silence of the forest was broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the pounding of their hearts.
By the gods, that was close!
His voice gruff with exertion. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of war paint. Anya nodded, her breath catching in her throat. She had never been so close to death before. She looked down at the fallen troll, its eyes glazed over, its body still. Thank you. I surely wouldn't have survived without you. Torsten chuckled, a deep rumble in his chest.
You're a skilled hunter, Anya. You would have found a way, but it's always good to have a companion at your side, especially in these mountains.
He glanced at the limp troll, a frown creasing his brow.
A fine kill. Shame it couldn't have been more useful.
Useful? Anya frowned, confused. What do you mean? Torsten sighed, his shoulders slumping.
The troll wasn't hunting for food, Anya. It was traveling to uncover something important. I was trailing it.
He reached into his furs and pulled out a small leather-bound pouch. He opened it and carefully poured its contents onto the snow. A handful of small carved bones clattered to the ground. Divination bones? Anya asked, recognizing them from her childhood. She had seen her grandmother handle these to interpret the whispers of the spirits. Torsten nodded, his face grim.
The omens are troubling. They speak of a growing darkness, a shadow spreading across the land.
His voice lowers.
They indicate an artifact, an object of great power and evil.
He paused, his eyes meeting Anya's.
The Serpent's Fang.
Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. Anya shivered, a cold dread settling in her stomach. The Serpent's Fang. She had heard whispers of it, stories told around campfires late at night, tales of an artifact so powerful it could corrupt even the strongest of wills. What does it mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Torsten picked up the bones, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings.
It means trouble, Anya. Big trouble. We need to find that artifact before it falls into the wrong hands, before it's too late.
Anya followed Torsten through the biting wind, her mind a whirl with questions. The Serpent's Fang. It was a name that conjured images of shadowy cults and ancient evils. An artifact connected to a forgotten Daedric prince. Daedric princes, she knew, were powerful deities in the lore of the elderscrolls. Beings of immense power who often meddled in the affairs of mortals. And to think that such an artifact might be hidden somewhere in Skyrim, waiting to be unleashed upon the world. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. They trudged through the snow for what felt like hours, the sun slowly sinking towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the frozen landscape. The wind howled around them, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint metallic tang of blood. Anya kept glancing back over her shoulder, half expecting to see the frost troll rising from the dead, its glowing red eyes fixed on them with vengeful hunger. But the forest was silent. The only movement was the swaying of the trees in the wind. Finally, as dusk began to settle over the land, they reached their destination. It was an ancient Nordic ruin, half buried in the snow, its crumbling stone walls covered in a thick layer of ice and frost. The entrance was a gaping maw of darkness, the air around it heavy with the scent of decay and the weight of forgotten ages. Anya hesitated, a feeling of unease washing over her. Nordic ruins were common in Skyrim, remnants of a bygone era when her people had ruled the land. But they were also places of mystery and danger, often haunted by the spirits of the dead. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
An ancient tomb.
Torsten replied, his voice low and grave.
A place of secrets and shadows, but also, perhaps, a place of answers.
He stepped towards the entrance, his hand resting on the hilt of his axe.
Come, Anya. We have much to discuss.
Anya took a deep breath, steeling herself, and followed Torsten into the tomb. The air inside was cold and damp, thick with the smell of dust and decay. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of Torsten's torch. They descended a narrow, winding staircase, the sound of their footsteps echoing eerily through the silence. As they descended deeper into the tomb, Anya could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, the feeling that they were not alone. They reached a small chamber, its walls lined with ancient Nordic runes and carvings. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and a single brazier burned in the center of the room, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Torsten approached the brazier and lit a torch from the flames. The light revealed a hidden door, concealed behind a tapestry woven with images of dragons and warriors.
This way,
Torsten said, pushing aside the tapestry. He stepped through the doorway, and Anya followed close behind. They entered a large, circular chamber, its walls lined with shelves stacked high with dusty books and scrolls. In the center of the chamber stood a stone table, covered in more scrolls and a few scattered artifacts. A single shaft of moonlight streamed through a hole in the ceiling, illuminating the table and casting the rest of the chamber into deeper shadow. Anya gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never seen so many books in one place before. It was a treasure trove of knowledge, a glimpse into the past that had been lost to time. Torsten gestured towards the table.
This is what I wanted to show you, Anya. The knowledge contained within these ancient texts may hold the key to understanding the Serpent's Fang.
Anya approached the table, her fingers trailing across the dusty scrolls. They were written in a language she didn't recognize, the characters strange and angular. She glanced up at Torsten, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What language is this?" she asked.
The ancient tongue of the Nords.
Torsten replied.
Few can read it now, but I have spent many years studying the lore of our ancestors. Come, Anya, let us see what secrets these scrolls hold.
They spent hours poring over the ancient texts, the silence of the tomb broken only by the rustling of scrolls and the occasional cough as they stirred up the dust. Anya, with Torsten's help, slowly began to decipher the strange symbols, the forgotten language of her ancestors coming to life before her eyes. The scroll spoke of a time long ago, when the world was young and the gods walked among mortals. They spoke of a Daedric prince, a being of cruelty who had been cast out of the heavens for his transgressions. This prince, whose name had been lost to time, had created an artifact, a weapon of unimaginable power, which he called the Serpent's Fang. With this weapon, he had sought to conquer the world and enslave all of creation. The scrolls went on to describe the Serpent's Fang in detail, its appearance, its powers, and the rituals required to activate it. Anya's blood ran cold as she read the words, the ancient evil they described seeming to seep from the pages and into the very air around her. The artifact was said to be a dagger, forged from the teeth of a mythical serpent, its blade imbued with the prince's own dark essence. It was a weapon that could corrupt even the purest of hearts, twisting its wielder's desires into a lust for power and domination. Anya could only imagine the chaos and destruction that would be unleashed upon the world if such a weapon were to fall into the wrong hands. "This is terrifying," Anya whispered, her voice trembling. "To think that such a thing exists, that it might be hidden somewhere in Skyrim." Torsten nodded, his face grim.
The omens spoke true, Anya. The Serpent's Fang is real, and it is a threat we cannot ignore.
He reached into his furs and pulled out a map, its surface worn and faded. It depicted the regions of Tamriel, the continent on which Skyrim was located. He pointed to a spot in the northernmost reaches of the map, a region marked with jagged mountains and dark forests.
According to the scrolls, the Serpent's Fang was hidden away in a place called Hag's End, a desolate and cursed location deep within the Reach.
Anya stared at the map, her heart sinking. Hag's End. She had heard stories of that place, whispered tales of a place where the veil between the mortal world and the realm of oblivion was thin, a place where Daedric influence was strong. But why would anyone hide such a dangerous artifact in such a place? She asked.
Perhaps to contain its evil.
Torsten replied.
Or perhaps to keep it safe from those who would seek to use it for their own ends. But whatever the reason, we must find it, Anya, before it's too late.
Anya felt a surge of determination. She may be a hunter, not a warrior like Torsten, but she would not stand idly by while an ancient evil threatened to consume the world. She had a responsibility to protect her family, her people, her homeland. "What do we do now?" she asked. her voice firm and resolute. Torsten smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes.
We prepare ourselves, Anya. We gather our supplies and set out for Hag's End. It will be a dangerous journey, but we are Nords. We do not fear the darkness. We face it head on.
He rolled up the map and tucked it back into his furs. He picked up one of the scrolls, his eyes scanning the ancient text.
There is much we still need to learn about the Serpent's Fang, its powers, and the rituals required to activate it. But we have time. For now, rest, Anya. The journey ahead will be long and arduous.
Anya nodded, her mind racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with peril, but she was determined to see this through, to do whatever it took to ensure the safety of her world. The fate of Skyrim, and perhaps all of Tamriel, rested on her shoulders now. She would not falter. She would not fail. Chapter 3. The Hidden Path. The crisp air of the Reach bit at Anya's exposed skin as she followed Torsten towards the looming mouth of a hidden cave. The entrance, veiled by a curtain of stubborn vines, blended seamlessly with the rocky landscape, a testament to the secrets it held. A shiver ran down her spine, and it wasn't entirely from the cold. Torsten's grim pronouncements about the Serpent's Fang, an artifact of unimaginable power, echoed in her mind. Anya adjusted the strap of her bow, the familiar weight a comfort in the face of the unknown. She had always been a hunter, more at ease in the wilds, tracking prey than navigating the complexities of ancient ruins and forgotten lore. But Torsten's words had ignited a spark within her, a sense of urgency that transcended her usual solitary pursuits. She was determined to rise to the challenge.
Ready, lass.
Torsten's deep voice, roughened by the wind and countless winters, broke through her thoughts. He stood before the cave entrance, his massive frame, easily twice the size of Anya's, casting an imposing shadow. Anya nodded, her blue eyes usually bright with the thrill of the hunt, now clouded with a mixture of apprehension and determination. Ready as I'll ever be. Torsten grunted, a sound that could have been approval or simply acknowledgement. He pushed aside the tangled vines, revealing a narrow opening that seemed to swallow the meager light of the overcast sky. With a final glance back at the familiar landscape of the Reach, Torsten stepped into the darkness. Anya close behind. The air inside the cave was thick with the smell of damp earth and the musty scent of something ancient and long undisturbed. The passage narrowed, forcing them into a single-file line, Torsten leading the way, his torch casting flickering shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls. Anya followed, her senses on high alert, the silence broken only by the rhythmic drip of water and the soft crunch of their footsteps on the uneven floor. As they progressed deeper into the cave, the oppressive weight of the unknown pressed in around them. The passage twisted and turned, seemingly designed to disorient and confuse any who dared to trespass. The air grew colder, and Anya could feel a faint tremor in the ground beneath her feet. A subtle reminder of the ancient power that lay dormant somewhere within these forgotten depths. They emerged into a larger cavern, the ceiling high above lost in the gloom. Torsten paused, his torch held high, illuminating the space. The cavern was a symphony of shadows and stone. the walls carved with intricate Nordic runes and symbols that hinted at a history long forgotten. "This place, it feels wrong," Anya whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady drip of water. Torsten grunted, his eyes scanning the cavern walls, searching for something Anya couldn't discern.
Aye, there's a weight here.
He lowered his torch, his gaze fixed on a point in the darkness ahead.
And I reckon it's about to get a whole lot worse.
Anya followed his gaze, her heart quickening. There, at the edge of the torchlight, a yawning chasm split the cavern floor, a black abyss that seemed to devour the light and amplify the unsettling silence. The faint tremor she had felt earlier intensified, vibrating through the very rock beneath their feet. What is that?" Anya asked, her voice tight with apprehension.
Our path forward, it seems.
Torsten replied, his tone grim.
And judging by the tremors, it's guarded.
He uncoiled a thick rope from his pack, securing one end to a sturdy outcropping of rock. Testing the knot with a practiced tug, he turned to Anya, his face illuminated by the flickering torchlight.
You trust me, lass?
He asked, the question more a statement than a query. Anya met his gaze, a flicker of unease battling with the trust she had instinctively placed in the seasoned warrior. She knew little of Torsten's past, only that he had a reputation for both strength and wisdom, qualities that had earned him respect throughout the Reach. And despite his gruff exterior, she had glimpsed a kindness in his eyes, a protectiveness that extended beyond their shared mission. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. "I do," she replied, her voice firm. Torsten nodded, a flicker of something akin to approval crossing his features. He tossed the other end of the rope across the chasm, the heavy coil disappearing into the darkness with a soft thud.
Good, then hold tight and don't look down.
Anya swallowed her anxieties, gripping the rough rope with both hands, her knuckles white with tension. She stepped cautiously towards the edge of the abyss, the ground beneath her feet crumbling slightly, sending a shiver of fear through her. With a deep breath, she pushed off, swinging out over the darkness, the torchlight vanishing above, leaving her suspended in a world of cold, damp air and unsettling silence. Below, the chasm yawned, a black void that seemed to beckon her towards oblivion. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the urge to look down, her stomach churning with a dizzying combination of fear and adrenaline. She could feel the vibrations of the tremors echoing through the fibers of the rope and into her very bones.
We're not alone down here.
Torsten's voice, distant but urgent, spurred her. Anya forced open her eyes, focusing on the ledge she leapt off, a shadowy silhouette against the faint glow of Torsten's torch. She lowered herself hand over hand, ignoring the aching muscles in her arms. The chasm below a terrifying blur at the edge of her vision. The air grew heavy with the scent of something cold and decayed, a stench that sent a prickle of fear down her spine. Near the opposite side, Anya clocks a good landing. Her feet touch solid ground. She stumbled, her legs shaky from the lingering fear.
Well done, lass.
He grunted, a hint of pride in his voice. Torsten quickly lowers himself. He retrieves the rope, coiling it carefully, his movements efficient and practiced.
But we're not out of the woods yet. There's something unnatural about this place.
He moved cautiously towards the far end of the cavern, his torch illuminating the passage that continued deeper into the mountain. Anya followed, her hand resting on the hilt of her hunting knife, her senses straining for any sign of danger. The air grew colder, and the faint tremors that had accompanied them throughout their journey intensified, now a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo the beating of a monstrous heart. The passage narrowed, the walls closing in, the oppressive weight of the mountain above seeming to crush the very air from their lungs. A low moan, deep and guttural, echoed through the passage, followed by a scraping sound that sent shivers down Anya's spine. She gripped her knife tighter, her breath catching in her throat. "What was that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with apprehension. Torsten held up a hand, silencing her. He lowered his torch, plunging the passage into deeper shadow, his eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness ahead.
Draugr,
He muttered, his voice a low growl.
and they're not happy to see us.
Anya's heart pounded against her ribs. She had heard tales of Draugr, the undead guardians of ancient Nordic tombs. Their restless spirits, bound to protect their resting places from any who dared to disturb them. They were said to be fearsome warriors, their bodies imbued with unnatural strength and speed, their souls twisted by an eternity of bitterness and rage. The moans grew louder, joined by the clatter of bones and the scraping of heavy armor. From the darkness ahead, two glowing orbs materialized, burning with a cold, malevolent light. Then another pair, and another, until the passage was filled with the eerie glow of spectral eyes, fixated on their every move. Anya felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and the primal urge to fight or flee. Her bow, usually her source of confidence and control, felt cumbersome in the confined space. She drew her hunting knife, the familiar weight a small comfort in the face of the overwhelming dread that threatened to consume her. Torsten stepped forward, his axe held high, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The war paint on his face seemed to darken, his eyes burning with a fierce light. He was a warrior born, and in this moment, facing the undead guardians of this forgotten tomb, he seemed to embody the very spirit of his Nord ancestors, those who had faced countless dangers and emerged victorious.
Hold fast, lass!
He boomed, his voice echoing through the passage, a challenge to the undead horde.
Let's show these bone rattlers what it means to face a Nord.
With a roar that shook the very foundations of the mountain, Torsten charged into the darkness, his axe a blur of motion as he met the first Draugr head-on. The clash of steel echoed through the passage, sparks flying as the enchanted axe bit deep into the decaying flesh of an undead warrior. Anya hesitated for a moment, the primal fear threatening to paralyze her. But the sight of Torsten battling the undead horde with such ferocity and determination ignited a spark of courage within her. She was a Nord, just as he was, and the blood of heroes flowed through her veins. She would not cower in the face of danger. She would fight. Taking a deep breath, Anya raised her bow, her movements smooth and practiced. She nocked an arrow, aiming for the glowing orbs that marked the eyes of the approaching Draugr. She released the arrow, the bowstring singing a deadly tune as it cut through the air. The arrow found its mark, burying itself deep in the skull of the undead warrior, silencing its moans and extinguishing the eerie glow of its eyes. Another arrow followed, and another, each finding its mark with deadly precision. Anya moved with a grace born of countless hunts, dodging the clumsy swings of the approaching Draugr, her arrows striking their vulnerable points, slowing their advance, buying Torsten precious time. The cavern was a whirlwind of chaos and shadow, the clash of steel and the guttural moans of the undead blending with the rhythmic thud of Anya's heartbeat. She felt a strange detachment from the battle, her movements almost automatic, her focus narrowed to the task at hand: survive, protect, prevail. Torsten, a whirlwind of fur and steel, hacked and slashed his way through the undead, his axe a deadly extension of his will. He fought with a primal rage, a berserker fury that seemed to fuel his every move. But despite his strength and experience, the Draugr were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless, their attacks driven by a primal hunger that knew no satiation. One of the Draugr, its ancient armor partially rotted away, revealing the skeletal frame beneath, lunged at Anya, its rusted sword raised high. She dodged the attack, rolling out of the way just in time, the blade whistling past her ear. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding, her knife raised defensively. The Draugr pressed its attack, its movements surprisingly swift for its decayed state, its glowing eyes fixated on her with a cold, unwavering intensity. Anya parried a blow, the force of the impact jarring her arm, but she held her ground. Her movements fluid and evasive, waiting for an opening. As the Draugr raised its sword for another attack, Anya saw her chance. She ducked beneath the swing, thrusting upward with her knife, the blade finding its mark, plunging deep into the exposed ribcage. The Draugr let out a strangled gasp, its glowing eyes flickering before collapsing to the ground, its bones clattering against the stone floor. Anya staggered back, panting, her knife dripping with the ichor of the undead. Her heart pounded in her chest, her limbs trembling from the exertion and the lingering adrenaline. She had never faced such a creature before, and the fear it had evoked within her still lingered, a cold knot in her stomach.
Anya, look out!
Torsten's voice, laced with urgency, snapped her back to the present. She turned just in time to see another Draugr, its skeletal face contorted in a silent snarl, lunging towards her, its rusted axe raised high. Time seemed to slow, and Anya watched in horror as the axe descended towards her, the cold steel glinting in the dim light. She knew she couldn't dodge, couldn't block the blow. She braced herself for the impact, closing her eyes, accepting the inevitable. But the impact never came. Instead, she heard a sickening crunch, followed by a heavy thud. She opened her eyes to see the Draugr lying at her feet, its skull caved in, its body still. Standing over it, his axe dripping with the undead blood, was Torsten, his face a mask of grim determination.
I told you to watch out, lass.
He growled, his voice rough with exertion.
You need to be more careful. These bone rattlers are quick, even for the dead.
Anya nodded, her breath catching in her throat. She had been so focused on the Draugr she had just defeated that she had failed to notice the other approaching. If it hadn't been for Torsten, she would be dead. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You saved my life." Torsten grunted, dismissing her gratitude with a wave of his hand.
We need to keep moving. There's no telling how many more of these creatures are lurking in this tomb.
He turned and continued down the passage, his torch casting long, flickering shadows. Anya followed, her senses on high alert, her heart pounding in her chest. She had survived her first encounter with the Draugr, but she knew it wouldn't be her last. As they progressed deeper into the tomb, the passage opened into a larger chamber, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The walls were lined with ancient sarcophagi, their stone lids carved with intricate runes and symbols that hinted at the power and prestige of those who lay within. Anya shivered, the oppressive weight of the tomb pressing down on her. She felt a sense of profound unease, a feeling that they were trespassing on sacred ground, a place where the dead should be left undisturbed. Torsten paused in the center of the chamber, his torch held high, illuminating the space. His eyes scanned the walls, searching for something.
There's something off about this place,
he muttered, his voice low and thoughtful.
I can feel it, a power that's different from the Draugr.
He lowered his torch, his gaze falling on a section of wall that seemed to shimmer slightly in the flickering light. He approached it, running his hand along the rough surface, his fingers tracing the outline of an inscription carved into the stone.
Here we are,
he said, his voice a low rumble.
Looks like we found our way.
Anya approached, her eyes drawn to the inscription. It was written in Nordic runes, the language of her ancestors, but the symbols seemed to writhe and twist before her eyes, their meaning elusive. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Torsten squinted, his brow furrowed in concentration.
It's a riddle of sorts. A test, perhaps, to ensure only those worthy may pass.
He stepped back, his eyes fixed on the inscription. He took a deep breath, and then, in a clear, strong voice, he began to recite the words carved into the stone. As he spoke, the runes seemed to come alive, glowing with a faint, ethereal light. The air in the chamber crackled with energy, and Anya felt a prickling sensation on her skin, as if the very air were charged with magic. Suddenly, a section of wall slid back, revealing a hidden passage. The air within the passage was cold and still, as if it had been sealed for centuries. Undisturbed by the passage of time, Torsten turned to Anya, a grim smile playing on his lips.
It seems we've passed the test, lass. Shall we see what lies beyond?
Anya nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but she was determined to see this through, to do whatever it took to prevent the Serpent's Fang from falling into the wrong hands. She followed Torsten into the hidden passage, the darkness swallowing them whole.